Well, it's been a busy week and it's time to get into some of these Final Fantasy previews now. I'm not going to go over every single preview that's out there. It's just too difficult to catch up with all that stuff. But I want to talk about the legends that I want to try to build some decks around and some cards that I would recommend adding to decks depending on the playstyle you want to go with. But what I'm going to try to build these as, these are the recommendations I'm going to give. So let's get into it right now. First up, we have Squall CD Mercenary. For 2, a white and a black. It's a 3/4 human knight mercenary with rough divide. Says whenever a creature you control attacks alone, it gains double strike until end of turn. And whenever Squall deals combat damage, return target permanent card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. One of the only 3 Final Fantasy games I've actually ever tried to play, Final Fantasy VIII, and its characters kind of stuck out to me because of one thing: the Gunblade duel cinematic that was in there between Squall and Cypher, wielding these cool looking swords, only to realize that they have a grip and a mechanism of a type of revolver. It just seemed kind of badass when this game came out. Seeing this version of Squall brings back those memories. It makes me want to create a Voltron value engine deck around him where we can use cards that grant Exalted and other things that reward you for attacking with a single creature. I also want to include cheap permanents like auras that Squall can bring back on combat damage to buff him even more. So some of the suggestions I would actually base this deck around would be things like Merchant of Truth. It gives all of our clues exalted. So the more clues that we create, whether it's through the merchant's own ability of when a non-token creature dies or other investigate cards that create clues for us, we're going to have an exalted trigger go off of each one of those clues. Or we have Rashal Fist of Torm, which was the um universes within version of one of the secret layers that gives all of our auras exalted. Well, we're going to play some other auras in the deck, so we give those exalted as well to keep pumping Squall up. Sublime Archangel has exalted itself and has special abilities that revolve around exalted. We also have Battle Grace Angel. There's just a lot of good exalted cards in this format that are available to us to make Squall really big. We also have things to make him unblockable, like Rogue's Passage and Bilbo's Ring, because we want to make contact. And the best way to get a quote unquote Voltron, a single creature that can punch our opponents out, is going to end up being make it unblockable. And then we also have the things that I want to add in terms of auras, such as All That Glitters, Ethereal Armor, and Tempest Technique. This is going to look at any kind of artifacts and enchantments that we have, and we're just going to start bolstering the ever-living crap out of Squall's size. And with the double strike, it's not going to take long to commander damage somebody out of the game. And then the gravy is just that 3 mana bring stuff back. It's the same kind of thing that you see on a Sun Titan, but in this case, it's on a combat damage trigger, so it's just all good. And then taking away the black from our black and white commander, let's add red instead with a red and white commander with Lightning Army of 1. For 1, a red and a white is a 3/2 human soldier with first strike, trample, and lifelink, as well as the stagger ability that says whenever lightning would deal combat damage to a player until your next turn, if a source you control would deal damage to that player or permanent, it deals double that damage instead. So next on this list, I just really want to try Lightning out. It's an interesting card that sort of acts like an existing card that we have had for years, Drana, Liberator of Malakir. You have an attacker that has first strike that can then boost our other attackers. In this case, Drana was giving counters, but Lightning can actually do something even better as it doubles the incoming damage. So if you have a bunch of 1/1s flying in, she connects, and all of a sudden those will deal 2 damage each, and the damage actually scales up exponentially as you throw around +1/+1 counters, anthem effects, and other things like that to buff up our squad. And that's what I'm going to focus on. So let's talk about things that I would, wrap around this deck and bolster Lightning's abilities, such as Anthem effects, Dictate of Heliod, Starlight Spectacular, Commander's Insignia. These things are going to bolster up our army that we're doing, as well as Lightning herself, which the bigger she gets, the more likely she's going to survive in combat, even with the first strike, trample over, smack our opponents, and make the rest of our stuff deal a bunch of damage. +1/+1 counters such as Ajani, Collar of the Pride, Basri Ket, Collector's Cage, Kelith, Sunmane Familiar. There's just a bunch of ways to put counters on top of Lightning to make her bigger, and we can even play some things that go wide with our counters, depending on what you want to do, and make our stuff bigger that way as well. And then we also got to have things that go wide to smack our opponents and make up this extra damage we're doing, such as Hero of Bladehold, Loyal Apprentice, Decree of Justice, and Anam Pakal Thousandth Moon. We're making tokens. We're going to be cycling that Decree of Justice to make 1/1s, or we can hard cast it and make a bunch of 4/4 angels. And Anna Pakal does not care if she attacks, she just cares about anything attacking. So, we're already going to be sending lightning into the red zone, so we're going to be making more and more of these gnome tokens, and eventually they're just going to come crashing through and deal double damage as they get through. Moving away from the combat-based guys I wanted to talk about, let's look at Kefka Court Mage for 2, a blue, a black, and a red. It's a 4/5 human wizard that says whenever it attacks or enters, each player discards a card, then you draw a card for each card type discarded this way, and you can pay 8 colorless. Each opponent sacks a permanent of their choice, and you transform Kefka at sorcery speed. And then the backside is Kefka, Ruler of Ruin. It's a 5/7 avatar wizard with flying. It says whenever an opponent loses life during your turn, draw that many cards. This is a very unique legend. We do not have many cards that do like similar things to this on the front side or the back side. Besides, we have had cards that let us draw cards equal to damage dealt, or just a single card each time a creature connects with an opponent. But I don't think we've really had any that is like whatever life loss, you're drawing that many cards. So this is really, really good. And the front side is really good as well to allow us to net up to 4 cards depending on which kinds of card types got discarded in one burst. But the transform side is where the money is. This means that you can turn burn spells into draw, little pingers into card draw, or big hits into bursts of draw. So what this means is, for an example, you can do a build yourself a better ancestral recall by flipping Kefka, and then something like a bolt wave will suddenly read pay a red, deal 3 damage to each opponent, draw 9 cards. That's some really scary stuff. So what I would do is then build around some direct damage, such as the aforementioned Bolt Wave, Lightning Bolt. We can talk about some things that benefit draws, such as Proph's Eidetic Memory, the Locust God, Chasm Skulker. Eidetic Memory is going to go ahead and pump up our creatures. For every card you draw, you're going to dump a counter past that first card you drew in the turn. Locust God, every card you draw is going to give you an additional 1/1 insect token. Then you can hit with those tokens, which then will cause Kefka to trigger on the backside and draw more cards and make more locusts for later. Chasm Skulker builds up, and when it dies, you draw a bunch of cards. You can do pingers and drains, so things like Impact Tremor. So every time a creature comes into play, you're going to deal a damage, and then you'll get to draw a card off the backside. Zulaport Cutthroat and those kind of things. Cutthroat basically reads whenever a creature dies, you draw a card, 3 cards, because you're hitting each opponent with that ability to hit them and make them lose life. And then there's the quote unquote infinite combo that you could slot into this deck, which is Psychosis Crawler. Once you have flipped Kefka over and you smack somebody with any kind of damage, Psychosis Crawler will go infinite, because every time you draw a card, they lose a life, and whenever they lose a life, you draw a card off of the backside of Kefka. So it's kind of like a weird variation of the Exquisite Blood combo, where you gain life, then they lose life, and if they lose life, you gain life, that 2-card combo. Well, this is a 2-card combo between the Crawler and the backside of Kefka that goes infinite. Then we have what's probably the most famous or infamous antagonist from the Final Fantasy franchise, Sephiroth, Fabled Soldier for 2 and a black. It's a 3/3 human avatar soldier that says whenever it attacks or enters, you can sacrifice another creature, and if you do, you draw a card. And whenever another creature dies, target opponent loses 1 life, you gain 1 life. And if it's the 4th time the ability is resolved this turn, transform Sephiroth. On the backside, you get Sephiroth, One-Winged Angel. It's a 5/5 angel nightmare avatar with flying, and the supernova ability that says as it transforms into the One-Winged Angel, you get an emblem with whenever a creature dies, target opponent loses 1 life, you gain 1 life. And whenever Sephiroth attacks, you may sacrifice any number of creatures. If you do, draw that many cards. This is not the only variation of Sephiroth that we're getting, but this is the one that fits with things that I like in any kind of aristocrats type build. And what I really want to do is be able to transform it, let it die, or sacrifice him, and then recast and reanimate him, or whatever, and then flip him over again because that emblem stacks up. Think of it as having infinite blood artists that can't die on your side of the board because you're getting these emblems over and over again, all while feeding into the previous emblem and any other drain effects you may have included in the deck. To pull all this off, we're going to need lots of creatures that when you sacrifice them, they're going to leave a body behind so we can hit that magical fourth trigger of the turn, as well as several ways to forcibly sacrifice creatures to get Sephiroth transforming on demand. As such, I would recommend some of the following things, such as recurring sacrifices, reassembling skeleton, 9 lives familiar, endless cockroaches. These things can either be paid for and brought back out of the graveyard, or they just have a natural trigger on them that allows you to go ahead and put them back onto the board or to your hand, and you can recast them and do them again. We have the ability to have sacrifice engines such as Viscerus here or Ashnod's Altar. There's other ones out there, but those are just a couple recommendations. Sacrifices that leave bodies behind, like Wriggling Grub, Doomed Dissenter, Infestation Sage. These things all allow us to have a second body to work with, or in the case of Wriggling Grub, 2 extra bodies. But any way you slice it, once you start sacking the bodies down, then you're going to get Sephiroth flipping really quick. And then we have reanimation because, again, we're going to be trying to send Sephiroth to the grave to bring back if we want to play around with that emblem in multiples. So we're going to have things like Phyrexian Reclamation to bring it back to hand, Reanimate to put it right back onto the board, or Not Dead After All, because as it's dying, we can go ahead and just bring it right back onto the board with this, with, the enchantment attached to it. Over then there's other variations of this style of card that puts counters on things, and there's all kinds of things you can do with this type of effect. Going away from the grim and dark Sephiroth, I kind of want to go in the opposite direction with the cute and playful looking Vivi Ornitier. It's a blue and a red 0/3 wizard with an activated ability, pay 0, add X mana in any combination of blue or red, where X is Vivi's power. Activate only during your turn and only once per turn. And then whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put a +1/+1 counter on Vivi, and it deals 1 damage to each opponent. I love a good spell slinger deck, and this one has the added benefit of not being locked into only instants and sorceries to trigger the damage effect and the +1/+1 counter. So any kind of mana rocks, enchantments, planeswalkers, all that stuff is going to trigger it and add into the chip damage and the counter to Vivi. So what I think the best way for this commander to go is very similar to how the current prowess decks go in standard, using lots of cantrips and straight up card draw to keep the spells flowing, as well as making Vivi bigger. However, the one thing that commander has that standard really only has one card of right now is Storm. Vivi kind of lends itself to dumping your hand into a bunch of cheap stuff up front, generating a high storm count, and then using Vivi's activated ability to recoup the mana and launch a big storm spell. So what I would use for this in our storm effects is something like Mind's Desire to get, free casts and storm off with that. And then we also need to add stuff to it as well to give him storm. So things like Row, Crackling Wit, which gives our stuff storm. The Crackling Spell Slinger can give our next spell storm. Elemental Eruption has storm, and as we're storming off, we can make a bunch of elementals, or you can even use Storm Scale Scion. You don't need to actually have a dragon deck if you can get the storm count high enough to get multiples of the Scion out on the board, because then all you got to do is, say you storm off for 5, and then you pop Vivi to go ahead and do a bunch of mana, and then you slam a Storm Scale Scion. All of a sudden, you're like, okay, I have the original and 5 copies of it on the board, and all of them are getting +5/+5. It's really freaking good in and of itself if you can get that count up high enough without struggling around it, and Vivi helps with that. But of course, we also need to have ways to get that storm count up. So you're going to need things like cantrips and draw spells like Ancestral Anger and Crash Through, which gives us an effect and draws you a card to keep churning the cards. Ancestral Vision, you can cast, let it sit and suspend, and then kind of let it when it goes off. That's the turn you start, spamming spells to get your storm going on. Behold the Multiverse, you can go ahead and set it off to the side with the Foretell ability to cheapen it up and then cast it off, or something like Stroke of Genius, just to go ahead and have a big mana dump for Vivi's mana to dump in and refill your hand so you can storm off the next turn. And of course, we're not going to want to try to rely exclusively on the +1/+1 counters making Vivi bigger. We're going to want to have ways to speed that process up. So something like Prof's eidetic memory comes into play. You draw those cards, you dump counters on him, and that way you can go ahead and get more mana out of it. Or Imperial Plate, which looks at the card count in your hand. Now you're going to be spamming spells and burning your hand down, but you're also going to be drawing a bunch of cards and refilling your hand back up. So the plate can actually give you a big burst of mana off of Vivi because your hand's been reloaded, and all of a sudden you got like +7/+7 or more going on there. There's just a lot of good functions for that plate to be on him. So that's what I have so far. This is just the first week of previews. I'm going to try to do a similar video for this later this week when as more stuff gets revealed and talk about some stuff I didn't quite get any kind of write up done on. There's a few legends I wanted to talk about, but I just didn't quite get it all pulled together. So with that said, let me know what you think in the comments below. How would you build these legends into commander decks? What kind of cards are you going to use in the decks? Are you going to try to go strictly Final Fantasy, or are you going to mix and match kind of like with what I have done here? All things are valid. All things are fun. Let's have some fun out there while we're doing this. I will see you guys in the next video.